Morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. How you doing today? Gonna have to forgive me if my voice sounds rough. Battling a bit of a head cold. Hopefully my voice is gonna hold with me the whole time. Also, just need to do a quick little color check. I noticed that when I did my recordings that my color was off. This is a handy little color card. So I know the values on this card, which means I can line them up with the recording afterwards. Thank you for joining me today. We are live here on LinkedIn as part of this bigger series leading up to AWS reInvent, which is quickly coming up to us. Let me just kill the fan, which is quickly coming up onto our schedules. Started December 2nd, 55 days left. That's kind of crazy. Awesome. So today we're going to be tackling a very cool topic, very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about serverless. Specifically, what is it? So you'll notice on the schedule, there's only one stream this week, and that's because I will be at Serverless Conf for the next couple days. Thus why the topic today, what is serverless? So Serverless Conf is in New York City this time around. This is probably the fifth time I think it's been held, somewhere in there. Fantastic conference. A lot of people talking about serverless, and I thought, hey, you know what? It'd be really great to kind of lay the groundwork so that people know what's going on, what serverless actually is, because I think there's a lot of confusion right now about it is, and then we're gonna touch on some AWS specific references. So this stream's gonna be a little more high level, a little more overview than some of the previous streams where we've done a deeper dive into each service. But I think that's super important. I think we need this kind of basis for what's going on. So as always, if you're watching this live, hit me up in the comments here on LinkedIn. I will be monitoring them regularly. If the Periscope stream actually managed to start up and get going, you can comment there. I will try to track that. That's a little bit trickier for me to do as a one-person show here, but I will be looking for that, though I don't think the Periscope stream is working this morning. This is always the challenge with live streaming. You never know what's gonna work, what's not. But we are live here on LinkedIn, so please keep the questions coming. That's what I find how this makes the most. This makes it the most interesting, the sort of the most engaging, because we've got this interactive, right? So again, just keep the questions coming. All good. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share out my slides to start with. Yeah, we're going to start with some slides, but trust me, it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. So that's the hashtag for Serverless Conf later this week. If you want to follow along, we'll cover that in a second. So what is serverless? You've probably heard about it. If you've got an idea, put it in the comments, let me know. A lot of people, it's a great buzzword. It is been bandied about more and more in the last 6 months, definitely. It's really starting to pick up. But believe it or not, serverless has been going on for a little while now. I think I wrote my first essay on serverless in 2016, the start of 2016, talking about how to secure serverless specifically. And then it's just been, building from there. But that's true of any technology, especially something that kind of breaks down, existing paradigms, God, I hate that word paradigms, but existing models and existing ways of thinking, as serverless does. So let's get the nitty gritty out of the way. Obviously, there are servers as part of serverless. The idea here, and I'll make these a little bit bigger so you guys get a little better view. The idea is that you don't have to worry about them. They're no longer your concern. And that's sort of the goal, is that this is no longer your concern. You don't have to worry about the servers that are part of this serverless deployment. That's the name sucks, but it conveys an idea, right? So for a while there in the community, we were joking that you could just call this Jeff. It'd be the same thing. But names, I think, are important. And the idea serverless as a name conveys what we're looking for here. Is it's one key piece of infrastructure is gone. And that, I think, is the biggest takeaway. But realistically, there's 3 uses of the word serverless as it stands right now. And I forgot to put up my little buzz clock, so let's put the countdown clock in the corner. So there's realistically 3 uses of the word serverless today. And you're going to see these used interchangeably. You're going to see these used sort of used a lot of the time depending on where that person who's talking about serverless is coming from. So first one is a noun. You're going to see serverless being used talking about a functions as a service offering. So earlier in this series, we covered AWS Lambda a little bit. We did a little bit of intro into Lambda. Lambda is considered a serverless compute service. Microsoft has a matching one, Azure Functions. Google Cloud Functions is also a similar thing. There's some open source ones that are out there. The idea is that you have code, you give it to the service provider, and it executes based on a specific trigger. Normally that's an event, whether that's a request from like a website request or another, like a message dropping in a queue, something like that. So that's the first use of the word serverless. That's, I find its most common usage is people are talking about the fact that it's, hey, I've got serverless, I'm using serverless to, clean up my database. Yeah, they have one AWS Lambda function, and that is a serverless function. Excuse me, I told you, a little under the weather, so you have to bear with me as I go to the water more often than I would. So the second use of this is the architectural term. So serverless as an architecture. Now this is the sort of, I feel, most true. It's a really bad way to describe it, but I feel this is the most accurate way of describing serverless, because mostly you'll hear people in the community talking about serverless in this way. This is what serverless conf is all about. It's an architectural pattern that pulls together a bunch of SaaS services and normally uses something like AWS Lambda to glue them together to build a unique solution. The reason why this is my preferred definition of serverless, why the community kind of focuses on this a lot, is because this is where you really start to see the business value. You take something like Amazon S3, which we've already seen in this series, AWS Lambda, and then a service like Amazon Recognition, which analyzes different images to tell you like, hey, if it was looking at this screen, it would say there's a poster in the background, or there's a whiteboard in the background, there's a person, there's a microphone, so that kind of thing. And there's no servers that you're touching, right? And from a business value perspective, that's almost pure business value that you're delivering into your users, and there's very little operational overhead. There's very little burden on you. So serverless as an architectural pattern. Now the last one is the most frustrating. Excuse me. Serverless is an adjective. So using serverless to describe describe what a service is. So you would say that Amazon S3 is a serverless service because you don't ever have to deal with touching the servers or the underlying infrastructure. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is people are then using that adjective to sort of serverless wash things. Like we saw with cloud, all of a sudden any data center service when cloud came out was now private cloud. We're seeing a lot of people talk about stuff and say it's serverless when, it's really, it may be from one perspective, but it's not necessarily, right? So, but still a valid use. Lambda is a serverless service, right? You never have to touch servers in Lambda. You never have to touch the underlying infrastructure. So there's validity to using it as an adjective. So 3 ways there. A lot of the time where you're going to find the most challenge, and this is a big challenge in security, and actually what I'm talking about at Serverless Conf tomorrow on the main stage, is when you mix up calling Lambda serverless and the architectural pattern serverless. And if you say, I'm doing serverless security, and you're only ever looking at Lambda versus the entire architecture, that's a problem because you're leaving a big chunk unaddressed. There's a big chunk that's not getting properly managed or properly evaluated, okay? So just keep that in mind, keep that up to speed. Okay, 3 different definitions for serverless. So let's go and look at that functions piece though, because the functions piece is absolutely critical, because that's really what makes this stuff come alive. You can have these various serverless services like Amazon S3, like AWS Recognition, like some of the machine learning services, but if you can't stitch them together and build something cohesive out of it, what's the point? That's where Lambda comes into play. So let's look at serverless compute for the next few minutes here, okay? And again, if you have questions, fire them up. I'm seeing some great comments. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Johan. I appreciate the feedback. I really like this topic because I think it's one of those really exciting things where we can finally start to get away from building IT for IT's sake. We can start to deliver pure business value. So these are some slides I did from a Trend Micro webinar a couple months ago. I've repurposed them here because I think they're really important. When we look at the shared responsibility model and we look at a virtual machine, so if you ask for a server, so you ask for like a Windows box or a Linux box from AWS in EC2, you're going to get an EC2 instance. You are responsible for everything you see on screen right now. So the operating system, the applications, and the data. Okay, so if a patch comes out, which there's patches coming out tomorrow, it's October Patch Tuesday. For Windows, you're going to have to deploy those patches. You're going to have to test them. You're going to have to make sure that that is up to snuff and meets your quality specifications. You're also going to have to harden that operating system. You have to configure the users and everything that you put on top of that. So the example that I always use that everyone gets a chuckle out of is that in this model, if you want to set your administrator password to password, you absolutely can. Horrible idea. Pro tip, never do that, obviously. And it should be a beginner tip, but it's still a pro tip. You'd be surprised what we see out there. But if you want to set horrible admin passwords, you absolutely can. If you want to make everyone an administrator in your box, you absolutely can. It's going to end in disaster, but it's 100% your responsibility. So you have that control. That's how virtual machines or instances in the AWS cloud, that's how they work. If we switch to containers now, right? So containers give you an additional layer of abstraction. So you notice the bottom part here, your provider's responsibility, the container runtime is a new layer of abstraction that we've added in on top of the operating system, but we've taken the operating system away from the user. The user no longer needs to configure Windows or Linux underneath. What you now have is your application and your data that's sitting in a container. That's your responsibility. So you've delegated one piece of the responsibility out to your provider. That's a win, right? That's why containers are picking up. Now, the ironic thing is that with Kubernetes, people are trying to take this back. If you're not using a managed Kubernetes service, you're just pushing that responsibility for the runtime in the OS to another team in your organization, and you're not moving your business ahead. Don't get me started on Kubernetes as a rant. It's going to be bad. But we're going to delay that for now. We'll tackle that in a whole nother issue. Now, when we move into serverless compute, into functions, so into AWS Lambda specifically, we've added another layer of abstraction. You'll see now we have the function execution environment right below our box. But all of these pieces are now our service provider's responsibility. So now the OS, the container runtime, the app, and then the functional execution environment are all AWS's responsibility. They take care of that. They've issued some really cool papers explaining how they take care of that. But now we just have our data. That's our only responsibility, is our data. In this case, our data in AWS Lambda is code. It's the code that we're writing. That's our data now. But you see how this model progresses nice and easily? You start with your virtual machine. You're responsible for the OS, the app, the data. You move to containers. There's a layer of abstraction, but you push a layer of responsibility away. When you finally move into functions, there's a new layer of abstraction, but you've pushed 2 layers of responsibility now onto your service provider. And it makes you a lot easier to figure out what's going on. Now, Mirko just put a great question in there, talking, which I'll address right now. What's the common misconceptions related to serverless today? Common implementation mistakes. Great. We're going to cover that right as we work through this right now. Mirko, fantastic question. So I think a lot of people don't understand this shifting and why there's a business value there. But a serverless app ends up looking something like this. Okay. So this is just this quick little sample. What we've got is some sort of database service. So let's say we're using like Dynamo. Bottom left corner for storage, you could say you're using S3. For cache, you could be using CloudFront. For machine learning, any one of the natural language processing services, or like image recognition. Let's use recognition to make it a little bit easier. And then you've got functions as a service. You've got AWS Lambda that's gluing all this together. So anytime something happens in one of these services, you're reacting in Lambda, okay? And that means your programming flow is different. It's now almost by default an event-driven programming. So user makes a request, then a bunch of stuff happens. There's no servers just sitting there idle waiting, right? Or at least they're not your responsibility. And that's the real difference here, is that all of these services are now built on a transactional cost. So Lambda is billed in US East, last time I checked a couple weeks ago, it was 20 cents for every 1 million executions. Okay, so imagine being able to run this. Look at this diagram, and we say this is a service where a user uploads a photo, and they get back an analysis of that photo, telling them what's in that photo, and if it compares to any other photos that other users have uploaded. You could do that entirely without running any infrastructure. Dynamo, you just simply create a table. You don't run anything. S3, we've already seen, you just shove stuff in a bucket. The caching gets taken care of by CloudFront. The machine learning is a literally send it an image file, get results back, and you do that all from Lambda. So you've got very little overhead, very little operational overhead here, which is great. And this is why this is a slide from the Santa Clara Summit in the spring that Werner had on stage, showing all these small sampling of the hundreds of thousands of customers that are leveraging Lambda and then gradually moving into serverless architectures within their environments. And I think, Mirko, to answer your question, or to start addressing your question, one of the biggest misconceptions is that you need to build everything in serverless. It's an all or nothing proposition. And I find where most people start to adopt the serverless mindset is starting with serverless compute, AWS Lambda, and moving to use that to clean up little things within AWS, or to glue specific events in AWS. So we did a stream. You can check on the link that I put in on the second comment there in Amazon when we did the intro to Lambda, where we connected every time someone dropped an image into a bucket, we did something. Right? And that's a really easy way to kind of dip your toe in the water. And I think a lot of people think they're, they have that misconception that they've got to go all in on serverless. It's a smart idea, but you don't have to start there. You can baby step in. And then I think also a lot of people have a misconception that a lot of problems can't be solved by serverless because they're worried about lock-in. And I think that's a huge misconception. If you break down your code and decompose all your applications into a serverless mindset where you have workflows, basically, user has asked for this, or the system needs to do this, you may be locked in to your current implementation, but because you've mapped everything out and the code running in Lambda is running in JavaScript or Python or Go or some other language, you can take that all and go to another cloud provider. But a lot of businesses I talk to, a lot of organizations are afraid of lock-in, and there's no evidence to back that up. And I think that's a huge misconception, and that's a big problem. That's part of your question, Mirko. The second part, I think I'll address after this slide. So later on in that talk, and this is AWS's new line, you're going to hear it at reInvent a ton. There are 4 primary benefits to serverless architectures. First of all is no server management, right? So if you go to a service like RDS, it asks you to provision a database server, not a serverless service, right? You go to Dynamo and it just says, start giving me your data. No server management. Flexible scaling. So you don't have to worry about provisioning capacity. Lambda just goes, right? There's account limits and you may hit those and you have to worry about those at some point, but Lambda just works, right? Once it's hooked up to a trigger, things just start going. Pay for value. Again, no idle time for Lambda. If your Lambda function is not executing, you're not paying for it. Similarly, for a lot of these serverless services, you're paying a reduced rate when idle. So S3, for storage, you're paying a certain amount, and then for access, you're paying another amount. But that is all tied directly to your value. And then automated high availability. So these things scale out massively with you not having to do anything else. And I think that's a huge benefit, or 4 huge benefits of these serverless architectures. And one of the common implementation mistakes, I think, is that people try to pre-scale these. They try to zoom it up and go, okay, here's how it's going to scale. Yeah, don't worry about it. The beauty of these designs is that they essentially scale themselves out, and that's a wonderful thing. So I'll give you an example from A Cloud Guru. They were participated in Melbourne, down in Australia, about a month ago. They had serverless days in Melbourne for the Aussies. I always pronounce it Canadian-wise, so all the letters. So disclaimer, I'm an instructor on A Cloud Guru, so I know the team pretty well, and obviously there's a financial interest there because I'm a video instructor for them. But this is public information, so they had tweeted out how, as part of their slides, they'd given the talk, and then they tweeted it out after, about how much usage they are, because they're an entirely serverless infrastructure, and they deliver video courses, so pretty clear value. When a student is watching a video, that's value to the business. And their back-end infrastructure costs for Lambda were under $50 a month to maintain a platform that serves 1 million students. API Gateway was about $700 a month because there's a lot of logic and security pieces there. And then their CloudFront, worked out to be about like $7,000 a month. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but the interesting thing was when you break down that spending, was that 85% of their IT overhead was going to the thing that directly mattered to students, which was delivering videos to them through CloudFront. That is a huge business win, because if you look at your business right now, you're paying a huge amount of stuff in the background that doesn't actually tie directly to the value that you're delivering or trying to deliver on behalf of the business, right? You're running all this back-end infrastructure to get to the point where you can deliver value. So the advantage serverless is serverless architectures have is that they make them far more direct line to value. So just before I flip over to my browser and show you some of the stuff in the weeds, remember that if you want to hear more about serverless stuff this week, tomorrow, so Tuesday and Wednesday, Serverless Conf is happening in NYC. Serverless Conf is a hashtag on Twitter. It is always super social, lots of stuff going on there. You're probably going to learn a lot of cool stuff if you follow along on that hashtag. But right now, let me flip over to my browser, and I will show you a couple quick things. So let me make this look prettier for y'all. So as always, this is my site. I put the link in the top. We're capturing everything that we're doing here for reInvent. This is the stream we're currently in. But I also just published a talk that I gave at all the summits this year called Advanced Security Automation. It would help if the link worked. Advanced Security Automation Made Simple. I'll double check that link in a second. But essentially what it is it shows you some serverless patterns to automate security stuff. Check that out when you get a sec after I fix it. But what I wanted to show you was AWS has a serverless page. So you go to aws.amazon.com/serverless. You're going to see a quick definition of serverless. So you'll see they're using the architecture definition of serverless. So we went back to our, there's the serverless compute, serverless the architecture, serverless the adjective. They are talking about architecture. So when AWS talks serverless, they talk architecture. Most people do. And then they go through some of the benefits, like why are you going to use it? And they show you the AWS serverless platform. So you see here, they're calling out specific services that would qualify to use the adjective serverless. So Lambda, obviously, Lambda at Edge, yes. Fargate is a container service, but it's considered serverless because you don't have to worry about anything underneath. The Elastic File System, DynamoDB, the API Gateway, step functions help you stitch together multiple serverless compute things, but something like SNS, which has been around forever, same with SQS, they're serverless because you don't set up a server and say, okay, process queues or process messages. You just say, I'm going to send you messages. You give them back to me or deliver them when I need them, right? That's the concept behind serverless. So lots of crazy serverless services here. You should take your time and kind of meander through this page. There we've got our 4 benefits of serverless. So no server management, flexible scaling, automated for high availability. I know it's kind of boring sometimes watching these pages. So if you actually come back to, I will share it at the right time. So if you come back to the Santa Clara keynote, I'm going to drop this in the chat here on LinkedIn. This is where Werner starts to explain the differences. So Werner's the CTO of Amazon.com. He does a really good job of setting it up and explaining sort of these advantages of what works for serverless, why serverless is important, and why you should be looking into it. So if we flip there from the serverless page, you'll notice there's this thing called the Serverless Application Repository. So most people are going to start with serverless by just using Lambda like we did earlier in the series. You're going to see, let me give you that post too. So when you're seeing Lambda, you're going to start with that as a kind of a dip your toe in the water into this serverless idea. I can't talk and type for some reason. I can do a bunch of stuff and talk, but not talk and type. Well, there's also this idea called the Serverless Application Repository, or SAR. AWS pulled this together about a year ago, and they offer the community the ability to publish applications so that others can reuse them. Others can start with that, right? So if you go to SAR, it's going to give you the idea of how it works. Basically, the app repository is there. You find what you want, you configure it, you deploy it out. That sounds like a lot of work, but it's ridiculously easy. And actually, we've got 4 minutes, so we're going to deploy a serverless application from the repository, and you'll see how simple it is. So if I click on, I don't like that big menu. If I click on the Browse Applications button, it's actually going to take me into this view of the repository, and you can start to search through this, right? So if you're looking for something in particular, like an Alexa skill, you can have the basic start of an Alexa skill, which are all serverless, by the way. Everything behind Amazon Alexa, it's all running in serverless infrastructure. So this stuff scales. Trillions and trillions of executions a month going on the back end. So you can go through here and find some stuff from partners, like Datadog has a log forwarder here. Some of the AWS community heroes and serverless heroes have published stuff in here just to show you what's possible. So I always keep talking about, image resizing. Here's a start of an image resizing service if you want to spin one up. What we're going to do, though, is the good old hello world. Why not? Hello World works. It has worked since the beginning of time. Basically very simple. This is a Python version of Hello World. You can look at the license. You can look at the required permissions. I love that. You can also go to the GitHub page for it. So in this case, you're pulled into the AWS Labs project model for it. This is a very simple Hello World, and I think they actually switched away from Python into JavaScript, so there may be a Python there one somewhere. But we've got our entry in the serverless application repository. We simply click the orange deploy button. This is going to take us to our Lambda management console, and we can copy this as a SAM resource, which is what we want to do. That's going to take it out of the repository and put it into our account. But we could look at the template. So in this case, if we look down to the template, this is the CloudFormation template that builds this stuff in our account. It's going to create a serverless function. Awesome. It's going to be running Node. That's fine. And it sets a few things, right? Starter AWS Lambda function. Any permissions it requires. It needs a bounce policy for email. That's fine. We're going to click on copy as SAM resource. So this is going to take it from the repo, put it into our account. No, it's not. That's fine. So what it did, there we go. Okay, they always moved it. So you can copy the SAM resource. That's the URL to get it out of the repository. So if I want to show you guys, you gotta love live streaming. Sometimes you say the right thing, sometimes you're wrong. So the copy as SAM resource is this link. No, that's even worse. It gives you the application ID that you can use later. So ignore that. Rewind a minute. What we're going to do is we're going to scroll down. We've got a README file. That's fine. The README's wrong because it's not in Python. Our app name, we don't need to give an identity parameter. We're going to click the orange deploy button. We've got 1.5 minutes left. Click the orange deploy button. It's deploying. It will not take that long. Oh, identity must have value. Road to reinvent SAR test. So I'll give it an identity name parameter, and we're going to click that. And that's just going to fill in the permissions that it needs in the back end with that name. So now this should work. Again, streaming live, sometimes it works perfectly, sometimes it doesn't. But here, now our application is being deployed, and it's taken us to the main page for this. And you can see our resources. The Hello World role is creating in process. And this is going to take a minute or so. And at the end of it, we're going to have a really simple little Hello World application. It's going to just respond Hello World when we click on the test app. Very basic example of a serverless application, but there's a ton of stuff in the repo that get really complicated really quickly, but in a good way, right? So now we get this green notification. Our app has been deployed. If we click the orange test app button, what we're going to see is the getting started. That's great. Resources here. Let's click down to see Hello World role being used. Okay. Do we have deployments? Our SAM. Yeah, so this was created. All I'm looking for right now is the URL. At some point, it's going to tell me there was a URL. Monitor. Go here. It is running. Okay, so let's go to functions, and you'll see serverless repo. Great. And now we test it here. We'll give it sample value. So you saw this in our Lambda tutorial. Click create. Test event. Everything needs a name. And now when we run it, success. So we click details, value 1. That's it. Just a simple hello world, right? You would think that, it would respond hello world, but it's a very, very basic application to start with. If we look at the code, it's probably going to actually have hello world in there somewhere. Yeah, it doesn't even actually say hello world. That's a shoddy hello world, so I apologize for that. But very simple, very straightforward. What we did is we took a resource out of the SAM or out of the SAR repository and deployed it ourselves. I am going to actually make a pull request to fix that later on if I have time. Same with the README for it. But the idea here is that there's a bunch of these serverless applications that you can get started with. Because there is a huge amount of benefit here, right? I'm just going to go back to my slides before we wrap this up. Remember, the goal here is that you're pushing more and more away, right? This is the serverless compute view. We're taking your responsibility and making it narrow into just the code, right? Your data is your code for serverless compute, and you can start stitching things together and create some pretty complicated applications, some pretty valuable applications with really little to no overhead. If you don't have to run the servers, if you don't have to patch all that stuff, if you don't have to upgrade it, you get to see these 4 benefits, right? No server management, no really underlying infrastructure management. You get that flexible scaling, you get pay for value, and you get that automated high availability. So remember, I'm at ServerlessConf the rest of this week. This is the hashtag on Twitter. It is a really active conference on social. You can hear a ton of stuff from some really great and smart people talking about the latest and greatest in serverless. I will put this image up again on the site. You've got it here in the stream, but remember, there's 3 uses of the term serverless: to talk about AWS Lambda and its compatriots, to talk about the architecture, which is what most of the time you want to be talking about, and then as an adjective to describe a specific service. Be aware when you're in a conversation around serverless to make sure that you're using the same type of definition, because if you're talking about a specific service or compute and somebody's talking about the architecture, you're going to get your wires crossed, and it's going to be a problem. Thank you for bearing with me despite the gravelly voice, despite the sort of the misfire on the hello world stuff. As always, let me know. I monitor the LinkedIn chat constantly. I get the notifications if you comment after the fact. This will be up on my site and up on YouTube later. And follow ServerlessConf during the week. Tomorrow, Tuesday and Wednesday, there's going to be some really fantastic talks given, and those go all up on the conference site afterwards as well. But follow along and join the conversation. Serverless is super exciting, and it's definitely something we are going to hear about more and more as we are leading up to AWS reInvent. But I appreciate you guys taking a little bit of time out of your day and following along. And I will see you next week on the stream. I'm going to put that up. It's Canadian Thanksgiving this weekend. So I'm going to have my turkey day, which is great. The leaves are all changing, and then I'll be back on the streams next week. So check out for that. Thanks again. I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you online real soon. Take care.